In this video, we're going to take a look at the pattern overlay layer style. It's extremely basic. It just applies an existing pattern all over your layer. So I've got my stick figure layer selected here. Let's jump over to our effects button and drop on a pattern overlay. The settings are also extremely straightforward. By default, we have a blend mode set to normal. We can set this to any other blend mode we like, such as multiply, and of course that's just taking the result of our pattern and multiplying it by the underlying colors of our layer. We'll go ahead and leave that at normal for the time being. We can adjust the opacity of that pattern, fade it in and out. We can choose the pattern itself, and by default, you may see the same thing I do currently, which is just two different patterns, which seems awfully boring. You actually have a lot more to choose from. If you select your pattern button to see this little preset window, you can click on the black arrow to the right, and there are several different patterns that come with Photoshop that are not loaded by default. So here's like rock patterns, and we can append that to the existing list, and so here are several more patterns that we can now play with. Down from here, you can adjust the scale of your patterns, so you can make those patterns bigger or smaller. If you make them too big, be careful, they can get a little pixelated and chunky. Too small, and you can get some strong repetition, and it kind of blows the effect. So it's kind of it's a handoff to figure out exactly what the precise size you need is. Also note that you can click and drag here in the document and move that pattern around if you need it to be aligned just so. I also should mention that if you make any changes to a pattern, you can create a new preset from the current pattern. So with this little button here, I didn't mean to miss that. Also, if you have moved your pattern around and you need to get it back to the origin, there's the Snap to Origin button which handles that. Finally, we have the Link with Layer checkbox. If you leave this on by default and click OK, as you move your layer around, which I'll do with the Move tool just by clicking on its icon, or of course you can tap the V key. If I drag the layer around, notice how the pattern is just coming right along for the ride, like nothing is happening. However, if I jump back into my settings and I switch off Link with Layer, click OK, and I try that little trick again, now it looks like I'm moving some sort of a cutout over a layer that is sitting underneath that happens to have a pattern on it. And that's just because, in this case, our pattern no longer comes along for the ride. So if you have a pattern which is placed just so on the page, maybe a very large pattern, and you need it to be aligned a specific way, regardless of the positioning of the layer, you may want to consider that checkbox. Okay, now for our purposes, as the help file opens up, which I'll go ahead and close that, that is a bug that I have seen a few times in Photoshop, but we won't stress that too much. I do want to mention before we run away that under blending options, the blend interior effects as group, thank you help file, blend interior effects as group checkbox does affect pattern overlay. Again, if you double check the tooltip, you'll notice that this affects the inner glow, satin, and overlay. That's all three of the layer styles that have the name overlay appended to them. So if this is off and I pull down my fill opacity, it looks like nothing is happening, and that's because the original pixels of the effect itself are fading away, not the overlay. Now if I switch this on and I start to pull down my fill opacity, now that overlay is being calculated as if it was a part of the layer itself, so the whole thing will fade out. So just something to throw out there as a reminder, but that will cover all of our settings. Of course, we also have make default if we happen to really like these particular settings to be the default of our pattern overlay, or we can reset to defaults like so. So that will wrap up this discussion of the pattern overlay layer style. Thank you very much for watching.